And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Saturday, March 15th, 2025. Starting with the state of the sea ice, we have ice in place across the northern Bering, but polynyas have opened up along the south shore of the Seward Peninsula, Golovin toward just east of Nome. We've seen ice thinning along at the edges here of the pack ice in through the central Bering, and just very little in the way of ice left in Bristol Bay or in upper reaches, say Turnagain Arm, Knit Arm there in Upper Cook Inlet. And with the week ahead, we're not going to see really mild temperatures. Actually, readings are going to average near to a bit below normal in the upcoming week. But again, weather systems are going to be mainly crossing the lower half of the Bering, coming up out of the North Pacific, maybe into the Gulf, but no really big storms to speak of. This little low here crossing Haida Gwaii into British Columbia for late this Saturday night into Sunday morning will keep the threat of some moderate to locally heavy snow going over areas of the southeast panhandle that include Annette Island around Ketchikan, Hyder. Several inches of snow is expected to fall, though readings are going to be near that freezing mark, so it'll be a wet snow. Secondary weak low develops off the Kenai coast late tonight into Sunday morning. Going to keep some snow showers going along the mountains in the eastern Kenai on up around Prince William Sound, then trying to push a little bit up toward the northeastern Gulf Coast, toward Yakutat, Cape Suckling. To the west, this low up into the southwest Bering is going to work its way east-southeastward with that frontal system. As we go through Sunday afternoon, here's where that secondary low is, just outside of Prince William Sound, the east side of the Kenai. The low coming inland into British Columbia, kind of a collection of a couple few weak lows, and the precipitation should be winding slowly down there across the panhandle. Back to the west, double barrel low, but not especially strong for the Bering and the Aleutians at this time of year. And then by Monday afternoon, that energy slides toward the east-southeast. We have a low that's south of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island with a trough extending northward. And then there's another little wave of low pressure with moisture that's going to pivot around this low. And that's going to force some moisture inland across south central here as we go into Monday night and Tuesday. So before then, across the inner channels of the panhandle, north winds 25 knots, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, 4 or 5 foot waves, northwest winds 20 knots there down into Dixon Entrance and off of Craig. As we go up the coast, those winds turn more easterly outside of the icy strait, 15 knots up there through Yakutat Bay, 20 knots up there around Cape Suckling, waves 6 to 8 feet. For Monday, mixed bag of winds for the inner channels. Northwest 10 knots, Lynn Canal, a couple of foot waves. Southeast winds 10 knots there, Stevens Passage, waves a foot or two, and then variable winds around 5 knots, especially there south of Metlakatla, waves anywhere from a couple of feet, 4 feet at best. For the outer coast, Sitka southward, southwest to west winds 10 to 15 knots, but as we get outside the icy strait, outside of Yakutat Bay, southeast to south winds 15 to 20 knots. For the northwest portion of the Gulf, east winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound, 2 foot waves. East-southeast winds 15 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, and then dropping down along the Upper Cook Inlet, 10 knot north winds becoming northwesterly 15 knots there around Anchor Point, and then 35 knot west to northwest gales right there around Kennedy Entrance with waves 8-9 feet. Winds will come down on Monday. South winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound. South winds to 15 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. North-northeast winds down the length of Cook Inlet at 15 to as high as 20 knots there, especially off of Anchor Point into Kamishak Bay, waves right around 5 feet. Kodiak Island will see west-northwest winds 25 knots on Sunday. On the North Pacific side, 30 knot northwest winds off of Chiknik. As you drop further south along the peninsula, lighter winds off on the Bering side, 10 knots variable, becoming southeasterly 20 knots either side there at Cold Bay and False Pass. Waves generally running right around 4 feet or so. And then on Monday, with that other low sitting down here in the North Pacific, look for northeast winds through Shelikof Strait at 25 knots with 7 foot waves. Northeast winds also there at 25 knots off at Chiknik. And then those continue and pick up to 30-knot northerly winds off a false pass. So waves generally 7 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side, 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side, with north to northeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. The Aleutians on Sunday will see winds south-southeast 25 knots around the far eastern Aleutians, Dutch Harbor on Alaska, becoming southwest 15 knots all the way out through Atka. And then once we get west of Adak, winds westerly there at 30 knots as you get west of Kiska, variable though to the east of there. And on Monday, kind of a mixed bag of winds, more northerly, 25 to 30 knots there over the far eastern Aleutians on Alaska, falling off to 20 knots Nikolsky, and then northwesterly 20-knot winds there. Atka out toward Adak, and as we get further out to the west, winds at least on the north side of Kiska and east of Shimei will generally be out of the northeast to north at 15 knots. And across the west coast, strongest winds, easterly 30-knot winds, Pribilof Islands with waves 8-9 feet. North-northwest winds out of Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, and then as we go up along the lower Yukon Delta into Norton Sound, look for northerly winds at around 10 knots, and where you do have some open water on the ice edge, maybe a couple of foot waves. And for Monday, 25-knot north-northeast winds, St. Matthew through St. Paul, 8-9 foot waves. Northeast winds to 30 knots here in that wider expanse of Bristol Bay with waves up to 5 feet. 20-knot winds, northerly winds out of Kuskokwim Bay, and then northeast to north winds 10 to 15 knots down from along the Yukon coast up to Norton Sound. Now, passing through the Bering Strait Sunday, generally north winds of 15 knots on the west side of the Seward Peninsula, north side of St. Lawrence Island. As we come up along the Chukchi Sea coast, strongest winds are in this Lisburn Peninsula. Off of Point Lay, Cape Lisburn, there could be some blowing snow with 30-knot northeasterly winds. And then along the Beaufort Sea coast, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, northeast to north winds, right around 15 to 20 knots. And the outlook for Monday, along the Beaufort Sea coast, generally 10 to 15-knot winds, picking up to 20 knots. As we get Utqiagvik down to Cape Lisburn, they pick up again 25 to 30 knots off of Wainwright, Point Lay down through Cape Lisburn. So there could be some drifting snow in this area, and then dropping down through the lower Chukchi Sea to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. We're expecting winds on Monday to be out of the northeast to north at 15 to 20 knots.